The cool, wet spring delayed soybean planting for many farmers, but most of the crop is in now and starting to grow. So it's time to address pests and diseases. In part 3 of our season-long Planting to Processing series, sponsored by the North Dakota Soybean Council, Rose Dunn has some advice on the best way to battle those potential problems.
Soybean aphids may be tiny, but they can take a big toll on yields. They were brought to the U.S. from Asia to Wisconsin in 2000, and by the next year they had already migrated to North Dakota.
They can migrate long distances, hundreds of miles. In North Dakota, we've seen 40 to 60% yield loss from soybean aphid when populations are high.
Canodal advises you to scout fields early when the crop is still in the vegetative stages. Then do it every week. They like moderate weather in the 70s and 80s, not too hot or too wet. They could start showing up in the next few weeks until late August. The aphids are tiny, but are a bright yellowish color.
Very tiny, like most insects. It's only 1/8 of an inch long, and they're kind of yellowish Mountain Dew color.
The aphids reproduce quickly, and their offspring can reproduce again in just 10 days. That's one reason it's so important to control them.
Only spray when you're at the economic threshold of 250 aphids per plant. Then you also want to see 80% of the plants infested.
With current prices and profits so low, it's tempting to dilute the chemicals or use cheaper alternatives. But Canodal says often that's not an effective strategy. In the last few years, soybean aphids have become resistant to some chemicals.
Even though it might cost just a little bit more, we need to keep the resistance low in the population. Because once it gets established, that's going to be the dominant insect.
Another problem producers might face because of our cool, wet spring is white mold. NDSU plant pathologist Michael Wunsch says one way to prevent it is to increase row spacing to as much as 30 inches, although that can cost yields.
When we are below 50% incidence of white mold, we almost always maximize yields in our narrower row spacing.
Wunsch says by changing row spacing and correctly timing fungicide application, farmers can effectively manage white mold and maximize yield with little to no additional input costs. This is Rose Dunn for Ag Week.